I'm going to try some experiments to see how the Sony CX900 copes with recording sound. First of all, as you can see, I've got it in auto levels. I've plugged in an Audio-Technica ATR 3350 lapel mic, which is tied onto my t-shirt, so it's about, I suppose, 4 to 6 inches away from my mouth. And as you can tell from what I first said there, the auto levels obviously started quite loud. There was quite a lot of background hiss, and then as the camcorder realized that I was speaking and there was some noise, it took the levels back down and the level of hiss reduced. Let's show that once again if I shut up. So there, it brought the levels back up over the course of about 5 seconds. I'm now very loud again. You can see on the meters it was going very loud indeed. But as I continue talking, the camcorder is sensibly bringing those levels back down. The hiss pretty much disappears, and it's not a bad recording sound. Now, the problem with auto levels, as always, is that if you do have a pause in the sound you're recording, such as me speaking, the camcorder will bring the levels back up again, and with that it brings the hiss up again, and it means that when the sound restarts, the levels will be too loud. There you go, lots of hiss, and as I start speaking again, very loud indeed, not sounding overly distorted, so the camcorder is clearly doing some sort of limiting to make sure you don't get too hard into the distortion. And once again, as I keep talking, the levels have gone down to a sensible, realistic sort of setting, and it's not sounding too bad. What I'm going to do is switch the camcorder into manual. And you should know, by the way, that if you ever switch into auto, it resets whatever your last manual setting was to about here, which is nearly at maximum. And even if you bring it back down here, if you go auto, and then you go manual, once again it's put the level back down there. That's just something to be aware of, a little gotcha. Now, as I'm speaking here, the levels sound fine. The background level of hiss isn't too bad. We're in manual levels, and yet look what happens when not look, but listen what happens when I stop speaking. Once again, the camcorder is seemingly turning the levels up, and with it bringing the level of hiss up. Now, this confused me for a while. I was looking at all the settings trying to work out why the camcorder was doing some sort of auto level control while I was in manual and had clearly set it. And it turns out that the camcorder's got quite an effective limiter that is stopping you overloading the input. So here, with this microphone, is actually too loud, and therefore the camcorder has switched its limiter on, which takes the levels back down to stop you overloading. When you stop talking, it deactivates the limiter, the levels go back up to what you've actually set them at, and as such, the hiss level goes up. So what you actually need to do when plugging in a microphone to this camcorder is start from the other end. Always start as quiet as you can get away with. Clearly this is too quiet, but just bring the level up to a setting where it sounds about right and looks about right on the meters. So you see these are very tiny little meters. It's hard to get a sensible setting of how it ought to be, but there you go. I'm just peeking into the top there. That's about the right level. And in theory, this means that because this is now set correctly, the camcorder won't feel the need to switch in its limiters, so it won't alter the sound level for you. So if I now be quiet, the hiss level should remain constant. And indeed it does. The camcorder doesn't feel the need to limit when I'm talking and thereby bring the levels down, and then release the limiter when I stop and thereby bring the levels up. So very key on this camcorder for best sound. If you're going to do it in manual, which you really should anyway, start from down here and bring it up to the right setting. Don't start from here and bring it down, because the trouble is anything that's very loud, as you're talking, the camcorder is also adjusting it for you, and in that way you can't get an accurate readout. Now, one thing I'm going to try is just plug in a different microphone to see whether that sort of ambient level of hiss is coming from the camcorder's preamps or from the microphone. Well, I've now plugged in a Rode VideoMic Pro and there is quite a lot of background hiss, but as you can see, once again, I have the levels in auto. So what we really need to do is switch it to manual and do the calibration procedure that I went through just a moment ago. So switch to manual and the camcorder will release the controls to me, goes briefly louder while it lets go of the limiter. Take that down and starting from a bit too quiet, bring the levels back up until we get to a place where they're about right. So if I'm speaking like this, looks good on the meters here, just the occasional peak towards the top. I'm going to be quiet for a second. Let's just hear what the background level of noise and hiss and so on is like. Well, two things to note there. Firstly, I think that's quite a quiet recording. Secondly, the camcorder clearly didn't try to bring the levels back up, so we know we've set this at a position appropriate for the mic such that the camcorder isn't having to try and compensate for it being too loud. So that is a good recording level. But one of the little tricks this particular microphone has, the Rode VideoMic Pro, is that you can switch a little setting on the back and it boosts the signal from the microphone into the camcorder. And because of that means you can turn this level down even lower and in theory therefore get even less microphone preamp noise and hiss on the recording. So I'm just going to switch that in and we'll see what that sounds like. Okay, so I've just switched on the 20 dB pad and obviously I am very, very loud at that previous mic setting. In fact, I can hear the camcorder switching in its little limiters. So let's once again take back control, start turning down the levels. Going to have to go almost all the way down, I think, here. And if we go one more, turns it off. That's one stop above the level being switched off. And that looks about to be the right sort of setting for this microphone, which is giving a really strong signal into the camcorder. And it's a nice clean recording. Let's just hear some background ambient noise. Pretty quiet. That's quite a nice sound. So clearly the Sony CX900 is perfectly capable of doing nice, quiet, clean recordings, provided you give it a nice, strong signal. What I'll do now is just take all the external microphones off and do some tests on the onboard microphone, the one that's built into the camcorder. And by the way, there is something I should mention, which is that if you're monitoring on headphones, there is a very slight delay between the sound and you hearing it in the headphones. So as I'm speaking now, I'm getting just a fraction of a second's delay between me actually saying the words and then hearing them in the headphones, and it's ever so slightly off-putting. So if that kind of thing disturbs you while you're filming, you do need to be aware of it. It's a fraction of a second, but it is ever so slightly off-putting. This is a test of the internal microphone on the Sony HDR CX900 from about 12 inches away. This is a test of the Sony HDR CX900 internal microphone from about 2 feet away. This is a test of the Sony HDR CX900 internal microphone from about 3 feet away. This is a test of the Sony HDR CX900 internal microphone with the recording levels on manual and set to maximum and standing 1 foot away from the camera. This is a test of the Sony HDR CX900 internal microphone with the recording level set to manual and maximum and standing 2 feet away from the camera. This is a test of the Sony HDR CX900's internal microphone with the recording level set to manual and maximum and standing 3 feet away from the video camera.
I'm now standing 1 metre away from the camera. This is being recorded on the camera's internal microphone in 2-channel stereo. The auto wind noise reduction is set to off, but the recording levels are set to automatic. Same test from roughly the same spot, about 1 metre from the camera. The recording level's still on auto, but I've switched the auto wind noise reduction facility on, and I'm not sure how that will change the sound of my voice. In theory it should just be cutting out any low, probably sub 100 Hz sound, so you shouldn't hear too much difference. Right, now this is a rather unusual test. I've turned the auto cameraman voice recording system on, and I'm standing behind the camera. The theory is that it should not record or reduce the amount of my voice that is recorded as I'm standing behind the camera, and you should still hear any sound coming from in front of the camera. Now I can see on the recording levels that it is picking my voice up, but I'll now do the same test with that cameraman voice system switched off. So I've switched off the system that supposedly cancels out the voice of the cameraman. I'm still standing right behind the camera, speaking at my normal sort of level. The auto recording levels is switched on, and I wonder if I'm any louder or any quieter than I was when the cameraman voice system was switched on.